Hi everyone, welcome to Cruising with Cruz. I am Cruz. As we talked about in last video, it was about cars and my love and passion for them. But in this video, we're going to be talking about motorsports because that's another reason why I love cars is because my enthusiasm for growing up with motorsports as a kid, it just made me love cars even more. But before I continue on, if you haven't caught up on the last video, I'll leave a link in the description. Please like, sub, and ring that notification for future videos, because this week I am planning to drop 2 videos this week because it is Speed Weeks, or as we now call it, Speed Weeks. With NASCAR returning to Daytona this week, it's now our season to kick in. But before I talk about more about NASCAR, let's talk about more the love of motorsports, because this is what the video is all about, is motorsports talk. And this is going to be a series of multiple videos in terms of motorsports talk. So motorsports, as most millennials, I'm pretty sure most of us grew up with the Speed Channel. Speed Channel was probably the best channel when it came to motorsports enthusiasts, including me. Because I remember back in the day when I had my own TV in my room, especially when the Rolex 24 happened and they broadcasted the whole 24 hours on Speed Channel, that was probably the best times. And I started watching Speed Channel mainly back in, I want to say 05, 06, when I had it in my room, because when we had basic cable, when that was a big thing back in the day, I'd watch it with my dad, and there would show a lot of series when it came to like Grand Am and American Le Mans series at the time, the Hooters Pro Cup series, F1, IndyCar, and of course NASCAR. But yeah, Speed Channel was a very, very big thing back in the day, and back when Fox owned them, they of course had like the OG commentators of Darrell Waltrip, Larry McReynolds, and Mike Joy. They would pretty much be hovering around, and along with all the other Fox crew members, especially whenever they rotated with other affiliate channels like TNT back in the day, and then of course once obviously NBC and then ESPN kicked in. But yeah, aside from that, the way they broadcasted motorsports back in the day was just so amazing, and that's really what kind of got me more into liking other disciplines of motorsports outside of NASCAR, And the first one I think I'll touch on is like IMSA motorsport, or IMSA sports car racing, or what was called back in the day Grand Am and American Le Mans series before they joined. But mainly what caught my attention mostly was Grand Am series, especially when they raced the 24 hours of Daytona, like I was talking about. When they would broadcast the entire 24-hour race on Speed Channel, it was good, and it kind of felt nostalgic because this year when they broadcast the 2024 Rolex 24 and they were doing the entire 24-hour race on Peacock, that kind of made me feel nostalgic because, there were points in the race where I would just like take a nap a little bit, just wake up and start watching the race again, especially in the late morning or late night hours going into the early morning stages of that race. That I thought that was cool, so I like that, Peacock kind of brought that back. But yeah, like I said, growing up, I loved watching the sports car racing, back in the day. Like I said, the Grand Am series, when they used to mainly race Rovals, like when they raced I remember one particular race when they raced at the Homestead Miami Speedway on that Roval. That was a very, very good race. And, I started watching sports cars maybe, I think it was 2005, 2006, because that's really when I was more engaged with the sport and was wanting to understand, these disciplines of racing, because like I said, growing up as a kid, I did watch all these forms of motorsports, but I never really engaged, like my brain was still developing at the time. And American Le Mans American Le Mans series too, that was something that I liked watching, but they also had like different channels that they were broadcasting that on. I think CBS was one of their big networks that they were broadcasting these races on, so that was pretty cool. But yeah, with the sports cars racing, it's crazy how big and like more engaged like other drivers from different disciplines of racing have been wanting to race in this, over the years when we had Fernando Alonso, Jeff Gordon, the guys from the IndyCar series. Like this year we had Joseph Newgarden join a part, and he won this year with Penske Porsche, so that was pretty cool, So but like sports car racing, it it caught my attention just because of endurance. You know, like when they meant endurance racing, it's like, yeah, they're not only racing around the clock 24 hours, but they also have the sprint races, like the 2.5 hour races, or the 6 hours at the Glen, the 12 hours of Sebring, you know. And I think it was cool when the Grand Am series and the American Le Mans series decided to join and, you know, essentially become one big series, you know. So essentially they had like the staple events like the 24 hours of Daytona, the 12 hours of Sebring, and the Petit Le Mans, you know. And so I think that was pretty cool that they, you know, over the years that they, you know, made really big moves, especially now with the manufacturers having a big part, you know. Hopefully one day when this channel does become big, you know, next year I do want to go to next year's 24 hours of Daytona, because that's been a bucket list of mine. But you know, yeah, as I continue on talking about motorsports, let's talk about the next one, F1. So when F1 caught my attention, it was in 2006. In particular, it was the 2006 US Grand Prix. And the reason why I say the 2006, because I know the year before is when they had the horrendous 2005 GP where they only had 6 cars on the grid. And of course, Michael Schumacher ended up winning that one, but it was just so much hype. I remember, because I know when the 06 race was, when they were putting the hype around that race in 2006, it was right around the same time when the 2006 Daytona race, July race, for the Cup guys were at Daytona. So, you know, they were switching back and forth from Daytona and Indy, because it was on the 4th of July weekend from what I remembered. And yeah, that was like the big talk. And then thankfully, I guess that year they were able to get a full grid, versus last year they only had the Bridgestone guys that were running, because it was a tire war at the time, and I think they were still having a tire war into that following year. But they were able to bring a much better tire to the track versus, you know, their competitors, because obviously Bridgestone's affiliate with Firestone, they were able to run at that time the Indy Roval, because they ran the banking part going onto the straightaway of the Indianapolis Speedway. So that's what kind of caught my attention with F1. And then essentially Alonso and Schumacher, that battle in 2006 was insane. And I remember when Schumacher announced his retirement from the sport, clearly it was a temporary retirement, because he returned back in 2010, I think it was, with Mercedes, after they bought Braun GP. But yeah, F1 was very interesting back in the day. Now, I will admit, I do keep up with the sport, but I don't follow it as much, because now with the way they have the Drive to Survive series on Netflix, it's not as eye-catching as it used to be, because I don't know, I feel like there's more, they try to put more drama into it. So when I see people are like, oh, I'm an F1 fan, I'm like, are you just a casual fan, or are you actually a diehard fan? Because I'm not gonna say I'm a diehard fan, you know. I like the sport, I like the venues they go to, but I just don't like how it's almost like a soap opera now, you know. And the thing I don't like now is just, it's, you know, I know back in the day it used to be, you know, Ferrari was like the dominant team, and then there was a point where Red Bull was the dominant, and then it came Mercedes, and now it's Red Bull again. But I felt like, you know, when I first started watching it, it was just, you know, you actually had teams going at it, you know. Like I said, when Alonso was with Renault that year, and Schumacher was at the peak of his prime, you know, with Ferrari, already having 7 titles, going for that 8th one, you know. I think that battle was very intriguing, and that's why it caught my eye with F1, you know. That's why I think the 3 most memorable seasons for me was the 2006, because of that rivalry, but also 2009 when Braun was just like the underdog team, you know. I remember seeing, like, that was like another season where I watched from the first race to the last race of the season, because they had a white car then towards like the last race of the season when they were racing at Yas Marina, which also I liked that track, by the way, because that was like, I guess, my first ever glimpse of a night road course, to be honest. Because I mean, that road courses at night weren't really a thing. If they were, the cars had headlights for endurance racing and stuff like that. But since Yas Marina was kind of like one of the first venues to have that, I think that's also what kind of caught my eye towards the end of the season. And when they won that title, I thought that was cool. Another season was when Sebastian Vettel won his first title with Red Bull Racing, and That's why I was a big Vettel fan, because I just loved how he was a very strong competitor. I mean, he kind of had like the I guess the German genetic of like Schumacher too, you know. But I mean, as of now, you know, F1, I'll still engage in it every once in a while, you know, especially now with the hype that Lewis Hamilton is joining Ferrari, which I knew it, like he mentioned it before, you know. Like there's like, you know, old articles and, you know, videos of him saying like he wouldn't mind, you know, ending his career with Ferrari, and I think that's kind of where he's at now at this point of his career, you know. And I applaud the guy, you know, because I used to give him a lot of shame, but I think now he's kind of going through a humble experience, knowing that, you know, just because he had the dominant car every single year, one rule change can change everything, you know. And so, but you know, F1 as of right now, I don't know. It's again a hit or miss for me. Especially now that they're adding more street circuits. I think that's one of the things that a lot of fans are complaining about. Me personally too. I think one of my favorite F1 tracks was Malaysia, where it had those two long straightaways, essentially like the main straight where the start finish line was at, but then there was that back straightaway like right behind the grandstands right there, you know. And even just racing and in games, you know, I thought that track was so much fun to drive on. One of my favorite road courses, of course, you know, there's Spa and then Monaco too. And I think when I touch on this too with Monaco, I think back in the day, the hype between the three big races during that Memorial Day weekend was the Monaco GP, Indy 500, and then the Cokes or the World 600, as you know, most race fans would know. But I'll touch on that a little bit towards the end of the video. But yeah, as for IndyCar or F1, that's it. The next one I'm going to talk about is obviously IndyCar, because, you know, I just mentioned the Indy 500, and Indy was interesting for me too, because again, back in 2006, my first full length watching of an Indy 500 was that 2006 Indy 500, when Marco Andretti was gonna bring an Andretti name back to victory lane, and then like that last lap coming on that front straightaway, Sam Hornish Jr. just barely passes him coming toward the line, and Sam Hornish ends up winning it. And to be honest, I look back on it, I wasn't a big Hornish fan after that too, because I wanted Marco to win, you know, and I felt gutted for him. I remember I felt gutted for him because he lost that race. But that's what kind of drew my attention with Indy cars too, you know. And I loved watching Indy cars, you know, during that time too. I didn't watch it as much, mainly because, like I said, my dad was more of a NASCAR guy. But whenever it came on, especially whenever they had the IROC series at Indianapolis, you know, it was cool seeing like those guys from the IndyCar series join in, you know, like Al Unser Jr., you know, all those Indy greats back in the day. But when I started watching IndyCar, I didn't understand it back then, but now I realized it. But IndyCar and Champ Car weren't together. So Indy was essentially racing on a lot of road or ovals at that time, not really many road courses, or if any at all. Versus the Champ Car series, they raced on a lot of road courses, street courses, and some ovals too. Because I remember seeing that's when AJ Allmendinger was in that series, and I saw him racing, you know, at Vegas. I remember they were racing on the oval at night, and that was what caught my eye too. And then essentially when the Champ Car series did the first street course at Vegas in 2007, I think it was, that was an interesting race to watch too, you know. But IndyCar was I loved the series. I really enjoyed watching it just because of how close the finishes were, especially on the ovals too. I know they had like a lot of close finishes, especially at Chicagoland Speedway. Like, I don't know what it was about that track, but they were just, obviously they were pack racing, but it wasn't like how NASCAR is like at Daytona or Talladega. You know, they were like still bunched up, but like kind of spread out. And I think with the banking on those ovals really helped those cars kind of just stay bunched up, you know. And with that high downforce, you know, of course they were going to be glued to the ground, and they were going to make some really, really interesting passes, you know. And yeah, I watched IndyCar for a good chunk, you know. Even up till now, I still keep up with the series too. And I think obviously my most memorable season to remember too of IndyCar was 2011, and not for good and sad reasons too, you know. Good reason was J.R. Hildebrand comes off turn 4, nails that wall, and out of nowhere you see Dan Weldon, you know, win that that race, and I thought that was a pretty cool. That honestly, that race was very entertaining from start to finish. Um, and then as the season goes on, they have the series finale at Vegas, and I didn't get to watch that race because I remember I was at a friend's house at that time. And then when I got online and I saw, Dan Weldon passed away, I'm like, what happened? Like, did the race even happen? Because I knew they were skeptical racing that race because of how bunched up those cars were. Because, Vegas was still, relatively recently repaved. I think that was probably like on their 4th year of it being on that new surface, and with that banking too. So of course the cars were going to be very close together, and seeing the practice shots that they had, they were really hitting wheels, essentially rubbing tires. I was just like, damn, that's some like really, that's like, they're neck and neck, yes, but also it's like kind of like, scary. And once I saw what happened with Dan Weldon and that horrifying wreck, I'm kind of glad they went down the route of just not racing there anymore, because I think that's kind of why after that race, IndyCar kind of has like stepped away from 1.5-mile ovals, because just even ovals in general too. I mean, look at Pocono back, I think it was 2013, 2014, when what's his name? I'm drawing a blank here, but he was a really good competitor with AJ Allmendinger in the Champ Car Series, and he passed away from getting hit in the helmet with just debris, and so as of the state of IndyCar right now, I'm still engaged into it. I love how the series is, especially with the Indy 500. Like this past year when Joseph Newgarden won, that was a really, really good race. I was gonna say something right now, but I'm drawing a blank here. But anyways, yeah, as of IndyCars, I just loved watching them growing up as a kid, and even having like, as you can see right here, I have like a bunch of little die casts from all disciplines of racing, and but man, IndyCar it's still, I feel like it's still an underrated sport. I think there's a lot of things that need to be done. There's a fellow YouTuber named by the David Land, he touched on a lot of good points in terms of the state of the sport. But I mean, I'm still gonna watch it. I'm still gonna be engaged in it because I love my motorsports, and I love that, I love that they're now back with iRacing. I think that's one of the biggest things that I'm happy about too, because I do race like the special events on iRacing, the Daytona 500, which I'm hopefully gonna be able to stream for you guys, but also the Indy 500. I'm just happy that their licensings are back together now. So there's that, and then in terms of other motorsports, there's like World Rallycross racing that that does catch my eye every once in a while, especially now with YouTube Shorts is a thing. I'll see videos of just like spectators' points of view, and just seeing these freaking rally cars just going on these one lane roads, just like womp womp womp, like and then Formula D, I started watching that. That was kind of like mainly that I got into Formula D just by seeing it live, especially whenever they were at Long Beach, because that was the week before that they had like the Indy cars and the sports cars racing on that road course or that street course. But the previous week they would have Formula D, so that's how I got into Formula D. And of course, me owning a Miata and just being into JDM cars, that's kind of what caught my eye with just drifting in general. I mean, drifting kind of caught, well, mainly, if I'm gonna be honest, drifting caught my eye with Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift. I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone has seen that. So again, 2006 was a very, like, I guess, revolutionary year for me in terms of motorsports, because that's really when I started really engaging into all these other disciplines of motorsports. But with NASCAR, I feel like we should end it with NASCAR, because obviously I'm not only wearing a shirt, but I'm honestly, I'm a diehard NASCAR fan. I grew up wanting to race in NASCAR ever since I was a little kid. I feel like most of, if not a lot of these YouTube creators who watch the sport can even say the same thing too, or have some kind of affiliation with the sport, And I had dreams of just becoming the first ever Latin American driver to win the Daytona 500, You know, I had all these goals, but of course, when reality hits, and you realize that it's a very, just motorsports in general is just a very expensive thing to get into. It's kind of hard, especially if you don't have that kind of big sponsorship money backing you. But NASCAR, man, like, I'm not gonna try to get in too much detail with NASCAR because I'm gonna save that for the next video, since we are in Daytona Speed Weeks. But NASCAR was very, it was all over the place, especially on Speed Channel. And I think the one thing I liked about Speed Channel too was like on Sundays when like all these motorsport, like, because I felt like NASCAR was probably like the last race in terms like if like F1, Indy, and NASCAR are racing on the same day. NASCAR was the last one to kind of cap off the race weekend, So you see these shows like Victory Lane, and then Wind Tunnel with Dave Despain. I think that's one of the things that I loved about Speed, was because Dave Despain kind of just caught my eye with all these other motorsports, and when he had the die cast on his desk and stuff like that, I thought it was just cool. Speed Channel really nailed it when it comes to coverage of just racing in general, with, like I said, NASCAR, F1, IndyCar, sports car racing, all these other forms of motorsports. Like, they really caught your eye, even into the early morning hours. Like at 1 or 2 in the morning, I'd see them like playing like old races, or even short track stuff, like World of Outlaws, like all this kinds of stuff, and that's why, I love Speed Channel, just because of the full like coverage. Like, I remember when it came to NASCAR Speed Weeks, even before Speed Weeks happened, the preseason thunder, as they called it, when they had the test sessions at Daytona or at these other like 1.5-mile tracks, 2-mile tracks, whatever, like it was, they never covered it. I think the first time they covered a preseason thunder was like when they repaved Daytona in 2011, and then 2012 when they brought back pack racing. So I thought that was pretty cool when they had all the cars out on track. Then of course 2013 with the new car. So Speed Channel really, they did a phenomenal job when it came to coverage of racing. But with NASCAR, they really, like, the entirety of Speed Weeks, like, because if I have memory serves me right, right when football season ended literally like on the last week of January, first week of February, from what I recall. And after that, first race of the season, it was the ARCA guys, and then it was the Budweiser Shootout, or the Clash, as we now call it, or they used to call it the Busch Clash back in the day too. Then it was the Budweiser Shootout, Sprint Unlimited, then it was back to the Busch Clash. But anyways, that kind of capped it off. Like, they would get on track, I think either Thursday night or Friday night, and they just practice for the shootout, and then they had like the bottle draws of like what starting positions that guys are going to be starting, and that kicked off the week of Speed Weeks. And then after the shootout Sunday, they go out and qualify, and then that would set the front row for the 500, and then the rest of the guys would have to either race their way in or prep their cars to make sure that they don't that they're up to par for the duels, and then of course they had like, I think, the 2 days off. But then you have like the truck guys come in I think Tuesday, and then Wednesday the Busch guys will show up, or the Grand National Series, as you want to call it. But the coverage, like I said, for every single practice, the headlines, it was just, I just miss it, And for those of you that do follow Dale Jr. and his podcast, I watched it recently when he talked about, how he missed Speed Weeks, and like how he talked about the Clash and how they're considering going somewhere different. And I'm not gonna lie too, like, in terms of like where my heart's at with the sport and how the schedule is, it's kind of hard to just accept what we have now. Because, like, for example, the Busch Clash, I was actually supposed to attend this year's Busch Clash, but since they had to move it because of the weather, it's like, well, cool, I couldn't go because I was at work that Saturday, And I think I know where that's the state of the sport is at right now. Is, I think right now, especially with them having that Netflix series, I think they're trying so hard to kind of catch up with F1 and have that kind of hype. But I think what the sport really needs is to kind of go back to its roots a little bit, and really kind of not think outside of the box, but kind of just touch on some old things, because I felt like some things back in the day really brought hype into, these events. Like the Daytona 500 now doesn't feel like it's like as big as it used to be. yeah, they sold out this year, and yeah, it's the biggest race of the driver's career, but I don't think the hype around it, like Dale Jr. said, is not the same like it used to be back in the day. Because now it's not even a speed week. It's like they get to the track on Wednesday, they qualify for the duels on Thursday, then Fridays it's the truck, Saturday is now ARCA and the Grand National Series, and then Sunday's the Cup. So, I think Dale Jr. nailed the head on that point, saying like, I think they need to bring the Clash back to Daytona and just kind of have more practices again, make Daytona like prestige as it used to be. One thing I'll give them credit though for NASCAR is bringing the Brickyard back onto the oval, and I hope they do a good job in terms of that weekend, because I think that weekend's really going to be a big hit or miss in terms of they're going to be staking on that oval too. And again, back to David Land, he kind of he had an outline of how they should approach that weekend, and I love that idea. I feel like it's kind of more it's more old school, and I think there's like it should kind of have some prestige back into it again, like when they talked about these crown jewel races like the 500, the World 600, the Indy, or the Brickyard 400, and essentially I don't know what the other crown jewel race would be considered. Like there's the Southern 500, the 4 crown jewel races. I know there was Talladega that was once a big Winston 5 race. Bristol was a Winston 5 race. Just in general, these races, I think that's where the state of the sport right now is just kind of all over right now. But I'm not losing hope. I grew up, as I said, me talking about Dale Jr. I grew up as a Dale Jr. fan, always will be a Dale Jr. fan. But again, I'll be talking more about NASCAR in the next video, because I wanted to save that topic more for about why I love NASCAR and why I think NASCAR is always going to be my number one sport. As in terms of my other motorsports and their rankings right now, I mean, IndyCar has to be second, sports car racing is third, and then of course there's F1. Well, not even F1, there's Formula D that I like watching, World Rallycross racing, World of Outlaws. But yeah, as of where the state of NASCAR is at right now, I'll talk more in depth about it in the next video. But that's enough for our motorsports talk. I will be talking more motorsports hopefully down the line. I'll be talking about the big events, like when we come up on like the Indy 500, the month of May. What's it called, the Le Mans 24, and also talks in other motorsports too. I hope to bring that kind of more content to you guys in the future. I just wanted to talk a little bit about motorsports on this one, because I love, like I said, not only do I love cars, but I love when they are on track and are racing. I think it's just probably one of the best experiences, whether it's, like I said, sports car racing, Indy car racing, NASCAR racing, short track racing, any kind of discipline of racing, it just catches my attention. I'm pretty sure a lot of motorsports enthusiasts can relate to this. So that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Please remember to like, subscribe to this video, and I'll see you guys on the next one.